In the following video, we will look briefly at international trade and globalization. Governments often wish to protect their economies from foreign competition. To do this, they erect barriers to the free flow of goods to and from their countries. Protectionism is a political and economic idea, as well as the practical policy of preventing foreign goods, either partially or completely, from entering a country from other countries. Autocracy is the idea that countries should be completely self-sufficient and ban the importation of all foreign goods and services. There are 6 arguments for protectionism. First, it protects or creates domestic jobs, creates a so-called level playing field so that domestic producers have a fair chance of competing with foreign producers. Governments may engage in protectionism to increase their government revenue. Countries may engage in protectionism to protect their defense industries. Governments may also wish to protect infant industries. And finally, governments may use protectionism as a tool to extract concessions from other countries in terms of trade. Let's look at each of these arguments for protection in turn. First, a government may engage in protectionism to protect or create domestic jobs. The idea here is that by not allowing foreign goods into a country, the government is protecting or maybe even creating new jobs for residents of that particular country. Second, governments may engage in protectionism because they want to create a so-called level playing field. The idea is that some countries engage in unfair trade practices, and the government needs to even out the playing field so that domestic firms can compete more fairly. The government may also engage in protectionism as a way to generate revenue for itself. Indeed, the United States, until the Civil War, generated most of its national tax service, or national taxes, from import duties or import taxes. National defense. Governments should protect their domestic industry, so if there's a conflict with another country, it will have the industries necessary to supply the government with the material it needs for military operations. Another reason why governments may engage in protectionism is the infant industry argument. This means an infant industry is an industry which is just beginning to develop in the country. For example, in the United States today, the solar energy field is just beginning to open up, and companies are beginning to establish themselves as producers of solar energy cells. The argument runs that the United States government should protect those companies from foreign competition. One of the key problems with this argument is that when does an industry actually grow up and no longer need the government's protection? Some industries have been around for 100 years and insist even today that they need protection as an infant industry from foreigners. For example, the car market. Finally, the government may engage in strategic trade policies as a way to extract concessions out of other nations for trade, or as a way to retaliate for trade disputes. There are 6 ways the government can engage in protectionism: through an import ban, import quotas, voluntary export restraints, import licenses, tariffs, and using other restrictions such as health and safety. Let's look at each of these in turn. An import ban is when a country bans the sale of a particular good from a country. The importation and sale of elephant ivory in the United States is an example of an import ban because it's illegal to bring that good into the U.S. today. Import quotas. The government places restrictions either on the number of goods entering the country or the total value of goods entering that country. Voluntary export restraints is when the foreign producer voluntarily reduces the quantity of the product being exported to the United States or to the country. An import license is a permit to import a product into a country. The government issues a limited number of these permits and thus limits the amount of goods being imported into the country. Tariffs. Tariffs are a fancy word for taxes. Export taxes are taxes placed on the manufacture of products when they're selling goods to other countries. Import tariffs are when importers of goods are forced to pay a tax to the government to bring a good into the country. Finally, there are other restrictions. Some restrictions have to do with health and safety regulations. Many nations require products to meet certain health or safety standards. And so, for example, the US and Europe have different standards for electricity. So if a European country wants to sell an electronic device in the United States, it needs to re-engineer it to work on the US power grid. Export subsidies are payments to producers of products. For example, the United States likes to export wheat and corn to the rest of the world, and so it pays wheat farmers and corn farmers a subsidy to produce those commodities so that they can be sold abroad. Finally, the government may effectively eliminate the import of particular goods by requiring goods that it purchases be of domestic content before it will purchase the good. Let's look and see what happens when the government places some sort of trade restrictions on an economy. Before seeing what happens to the price and quantity of a good, in this case computers, when a country imposes an import ban, let's examine the graph. The horizontal axis represents the quantity of computers, and the quantity of computers increases from left to right. The vertical axis represents the price of computers, and the price of computers increases as one moves from bottom to top. The demand curve for computers is downward sloping. The supply curve is upward sloping. The supply curve crosses the demand curve at a price of $300 and 800 computers. So the equilibrium quantity of computers is 800 and the cost or price per computer is 300. An import ban means the government makes it illegal to import a good into a country. If the government creates an import ban, the supply curve will shift to the left. The supply curve shift to the left for computers will cause the equilibrium price to increase from $300 to $600 and the equilibrium quantity to decrease from 800 units to 600. Before seeing what happens to the price of a good, in this case computers, as a result of a tariff, a voluntary export restraint agreement, or a quota, let's examine the graph. The horizontal axis represents the quantity of computers, which increases as one moves from left to right. The vertical axis represents the price per computer, and prices increase from the bottom moving upward. The demand curve for computers is downward sloping. There will be two supply curves that we will look at on this graph. First off, there will be the supply of computers with free trade. The supply of computers with free trade will be upward sloping. The second supply curve will be the supply of computers when there's only domestic producers. That is, the government has imposed an import ban on computers. The supply curve from domestic firms only is also upward sloping. Let us suppose that the government imposes a tariff, a voluntary export restraint on firms that produce computers from other countries, or a quota on the importation of computers. This will cause the supply curve to shift to the left. This will increasing the price from $300 under free trade to $500, and decreasing the number of computers available to 500. Notice, however, that the tariff, the voluntary export restraint agreement, or the quota, although it decreases the amount of computers and increases the price of computers, it does so in a less than if there was a complete ban on the importation of computers. A couple of other pieces of vocabulary that you might encounter when talking about international trade. First off is the concept of dumping. Dumping is the practice of selling goods in a foreign market below the cost of producing them. Foreign producers will do this in order to increase their market share in the country. In order to facilitate dumping, many countries allow for price discrimination. That is to say, it allows firms to sell their products at different prices in different places. For example, a firm may charge a low price in a export market, whereas in a domestic market it might charge a higher price and use the difference to pay for the lower price in foreign markets. Outsourcing is the practice of taking domestic jobs and transferring them to workers outside of the country.